Evening, everyone. Hello. I've clipped some of the questions that people were putting up early on because we are going to start with the Boris Johnson sideshow to begin with, and then we'll move on to those because there were some quite good questions related to other things. But we'll just catch up with the latest on it because Nadine Dorries is the latest for those who may not know. I think I've sort of discussed most of this. Is a Lord of the Rings reference and a video game reference both in a Boris video is spoilers, Phil. I do, don't I? What was the video? Oh, right, yeah. There were multiple references when I think about it. I was almost doing a bit of a Boris Johnson myself in that video, wasn't I? I was attacking him for talking about Spider. Well, it was not so much talking about Spider-Man, but you know the language he used, and Julius Caesar. Then I go and do something similar myself. But so the latest is, of course, we're expected to believe that in the vote on Monday, there's going to be a vote on Monday on accepting the Privileges Committee's sanction, punishment at least. We don't know exactly how the motion's going to behave, but if a lot of Conservative MPs stay away, and Rishi Sunak has issued a one-line whip, which means do what you want. So if a lot of Tory MPs stay away, he won't be able to, and assuming a lot of opposition MPs turn up, Rishi Sunak will not be able to amend the motion in a way that will suit him because he won't have the numbers for it. On Monday, I mean, we don't know because we're all just going off speculation in reports, but we are being led to believe that the government are going to be outnumbered on Monday. And this is fine because if the government are not planning on playing silly beggars, it doesn't matter. But Boris Johnson has said to his followers that they should not vote against it. And I said the reason for that is he doesn't want to look foolish because so far there have been, I gather, 8 Tory MPs who've come out in defence of Boris Johnson. And remember, one of those is Nadine Dorries, who's stepping down anyway, although she hasn't actually stepped down. So there's just 8 Tory MPs, 7 of whom have not announced any intention to step down immediately anyway, who have backed Boris Johnson. So that would have been a little bit embarrassing. I'm not saying it would have only been 8 vote against the Privileges Committee report here, but that does suggest that it would have been a very small number. But the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which is the Boris Johnson cult of personality, they are, with Conservative Home, seem to be urging Conservative Party members to write to their MPs, their Tory MPs, of course, and ask them to vote against it. So there is still a campaign, even though Boris Johnson has told his minions to stand down, there is still a campaign by his own personality cult to vote, to get MPs to vote against it. And this is all very chaotic, isn't it? If you think about it, you know, so the Conservative Democratic Organisation, it's not run by Boris Johnson, but it's run for Boris Johnson. It's, you know, David Cruddas, Lord Cruddas, who is one of the peers who was put into the House of Lords because he gave Boris Johnson's Conservatives a few million quid. And he is now urging Tory MPs and urging Tory party members to tell their Tory MPs to vote against this. Boris Johnson saying don't. So there isn't even coordination between Boris Johnson and his own fan club. And it's utterly chaotic at the moment. Remember when Johnson complained about home workers always going to the fridge for a piece of cheese? Clearly projection. Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of projection goes on in Boris Johnson's life, isn't there? But yes, I do, now that you mention it, I do recall that. I mean, that's another thing. Have you seen the latest thing? Was that in the Daily Mail as well? Where they've come up with this mock-up of like an elderly person hunched over and saying, this is what you will look like if you work at home. This is what people are going to look like in the year 2100 if you work at home. And it's like, and there's plenty of people of my age going, do you know what? If I'm still about in 2100, that's good enough for me. Although I don't actually think I want to live that long. But it's like ridiculous. It's like, so hang on a minute. How let's assume, by the way, that, you know, there was going to be some changes to our bodies over time as a result of our working habits. Okay, fine. How is working at home any different to working in the office in terms of posture? Because that's what they're getting at, isn't it? Posture. How is there any difference? Working at home, the image they had was someone like sat on the bed with a laptop. Now, there may be some of that going on, but in reality, most people working at home are surely working sat at a chair. And probably an office chair for most people. It's not a good idea, of course, to sit at like a dining chair for extended periods of time. It doesn't have the lumbar support. But, I work from home. Obviously, I've got a chair and a desk. My partner works from home half the time. She goes in the morning, comes home in the afternoon. She's got an office chair and a desk. That's how people work at home. What is the difference in posture? None at all. Absolute nonsense. The stuff they come out with to try and persuade people that they don't want working from home is utterly ludicrous. It is because, of course, they are all representing people who own office blocks and depend on the rent. If not many Tories turn up, can the opposition amend the bill to have Johnson locked up in the Tower indefinitely? Well, this is what I was musing on. I don't think to actually have him incarcerated, no. But it did occur to me, what if there's some shenanigans the Labour Party could play? Like, because Keir Starmer would be able to amend it if he wanted to. Keir Starmer should absolutely be there, by the way. I noticed, I'm actually just going to check again. I looked, and after the report came out and everything, the only tweet I saw from Keir Starmer was reflecting on Glenda Jackson. And he hasn't, as far as I'm just going to check now. Another obituary there. He's even tweeted about this cricket and Joe Cox, of course, Glenda Jackson. So Keir Starmer hasn't actually tweeted anything about the Privileges Committee report. I don't know whether that's keeping his powder dry for when he turns up on Monday. I'm assuming he will. I'm assuming that, various Lib Dems, SNP and Labour will turn up in force. I mean, I don't know, but I am assuming they will. There's going to be a debate, remember. And Nadine Dorries apparently is set to issue quite a withering attack on, I don't know, someone. She'll work, as we can see from this tweet, she'll work Rishi Sunak into it somewhere. This is what she tweeted today. What Sunak and his political secretary Forsyth did last week on a number of issues and levels was a cataclysmic error of judgment. Those decisions will haunt them. Their combined degree of smugness and stupidity has been breathtaking for all to see. Even their most loyal supporters have heads in their hands in despair, asking why. And I'm thinking, this may be true. Every word she's just written there may be true. But my goodness, for Nadine Dorries to talk about people making a cataclysmic error of judgment when she thought she was getting a peerage. And bear in mind, I knew that unless something happened, she wasn't. I knew that. I did a video on it weeks ago that the House of Lords Appointments Committee had said these MPs are not going to be able to defer their appointments. They have to stand down or reject the peerage. I did a video on it. And yet she must have seen the same articles in the newspapers, and yet she still thought she was getting a peerage. Why? Because she believed Boris Johnson, the biggest liar in the country. I mean, when it comes to cataclysmic errors of judgment, when it comes to smugness and stupidity, I mean, for goodness sake, pot calling kettle black. Right, okay. Do a few more on this one, then we'll come back to some of the questions that people had asked beforehand, a little bit different one. Mad Nads fueled by bile and Tesco value gin. I mean, so this tweet this morning came out at 9:15 in the morning. And again, it's like, so I try and put myself in people's positions when someone does something interesting. Like, this was a very odd tweet because it wasn't triggered by anything, because the events happened like some time ago now, like a week ago. So, well, over a week ago now. So it's like, and she tweeted this at 9:15 in the morning. So you think, so why would she tweet this at 9:15 on a Saturday morning, right? What's going on? What's going on with Nads? And you think, does she just get up drunk? Does she get up, neck half a bottle of gin and go, right, I'm mad at the world, I'm going to say something. Because who does that? At 9:15 on a Saturday morning, just tweet some random hate about something that happened over a week ago. But anyway, Nadine, me. Well, indeed, even her, if you look at her Twitter bio, like because I've not actually seen her show on GB News. So she's got it in her banner. It's called Friday Night with Nadine. It's the name of the show, Friday Night with Nadine. I don't know. But anyway. It could be hilarious if she speaks. Well, it should be. I actually joked on Twitter, in all honesty, Labour MPs should actually just get together, and a group of them should agree that they're going to wait for her, right? She's going to get up, and then she'll sit down, and they should all call out in chorus, "How are you feeling, Nadine?" Actually, they're not supposed to call her Nadine. They should just call out, "How are you feeling?" You're supposed to not call each other by the name, are you? You're supposed to call them by their... She would be the Right Honourable Member for Mid Bedfordshire. But that's a bit of a gobful. They can't do that. Questionable obscenity. Since working from home, I've improved my posture and range of motion dramatically. Not having to sit in a chair for hours allows me to do yoga. Well, there you go. I mean, there'll be different things going on, of course, when people are working at home. But my point would be there is certainly no reason for your posture to develop more poorly working at home than working in an office, quite frankly. But anyway, oh dear, someone thinks Nads is on the absinthe. Oh, she'd be passed out. She wouldn't be able to text, surely, would she? That's an evil drink. Evil drink. Smartphones and texting plus working from home might mean we all get big thumbs and tiny legs. Daleks with a thumb rather than a toilet plunger. Well, people text from at work. There are people, my partner, much more knowledgeable about office workers than I am, because I was a teacher. I only came into contact with so many office workers. But even in a college, there's only so many clerical staff. Whereas she, all the time, there's some of them just don't seem to get anything done. They're just always on the phone, hardly doing anything. So, it doesn't seem to matter whether you're at home or at work. There's people just tapping on the phone anyway. And I know there must be. Because I have plenty of people watching my videos, during work time. They can't all be retired. A fair number can be retired, admittedly, because, as I say, over half my viewers are 55 or older. I do think there might be a case for Labour abstention of the Johnson vote. Let them sort their own mess out. No, not in this case. Absolutely not. Apart from anything else, it'll just play into the Johnson conspiracy theory. Oh, Labour couldn't even bring themselves to vote against to vote for it. They knew it was all a stitch up. They knew really they were guilty. No, they should go there. Keir Starmer should make an absolutely exasperating speech, absolutely tearing Boris Johnson a new arsehole. Bear in mind, the shadow leader of the House, a Labour MP, of course, described Boris Johnson as a liar, something, of course, that has had Dawn Butler and Ian Blackford ejected from the House of Commons for saying it. But you can now say it. Boris Johnson is a liar. You can say it in the House of Commons. You can say it for two reasons. First of all, he is no longer a member of the House of Commons, so you are not impugning a member of the House of Commons. And the second thing is that a parliamentary committee has called him a liar. He is a liar. So they can all fill their boots. It's almost going to be like bingo for which MPs are going to be. Well, there's already been at least one MP has called him a liar in the House now, but it'll be quick, who's going to fill it off, tick it off. How many MPs at the end of next week will not have called Boris Johnson a liar? In fact, every Labour MP who stands up to speak, not in that debate on Monday, but in every debate, including PMQs, should begin their question by saying, now that we've moved on from Boris the liar's reign, Boris Johnson the liar's reign, then ask their question. Just do it every time. But anyway, Since lockdown, my sister's moved back home. She works for RE Munich reinsurance company based in London, South Wales. To London's a long commute every day, yes. Do you know what? It's often amazed me just how insane, inefficient some businesses were. Before the pandemic, I used to say, like, my partner sometimes has to go 100 miles west for a meeting because it's a big international company. It's got like offices all over the place. And this was before the pandemic. And I would say, why? It's just a meeting. Do it video conferencing. And yet, even now, that company still has physical meetings that they could even though they habitually now use video conferencing, that is now much more embedded, as I'm sure it is with every company, large company with multiple sites. They still have physical meetings at times. Like, I don't mean now and then, I mean several times a year. It's utter madness. It's utter madness. But anyway, let us... Oh, go for this one, John. Did I see the Mar interviewing Petronella, Spectator journalist, this week? It was surprisingly entertaining. No. I often don't get time to watch or listen to a lot of other commentators, annoyingly. Do you know what? I'm finding being a political commentator on YouTube very much like it was being a teacher. In that, so it's quite a weird situation being a teacher, in that when you do your work, you've got lots of colleagues who are doing similar or the same work as you are, and yet you don't really get to see them work very often because you are there in your classroom, you've got your students there, there's no other colleagues around you. So you're doing the bulk of your work, you're teaching, with no other colleagues there. They're not watching you, you're not watching them. Now, I have worked in some places where they encourage you to take, to have some part of your PPE time to go and watch colleagues teach, so you can get an idea of what other people do. But it's a bizarre profession in that under normal circumstances you do not get to observe other colleagues very often, if ever. And I'm finding that as a political commentator as well, because I spend such a lot of time reading, the news, and not just from the news outlets, but experts I follow on Twitter. Twitter's still absolutely brilliant for following people who will immediately report on things of interest. I don't really get a lot of time to listen to other commentators. So I rely on, if something really interesting has been said, it will probably pop up as a clip on Twitter somewhere. That's what I sort of rely on. So no, the short answer is I didn't see Mar on this particular occasion, no. Right, I'll go through some of the comments and questions that came up early on, because some of them were related to other things. And then we could go on that. So the first one is a sort of Labour one. Let's get it out of the way. Someone's going to ask this later on as well. So it says, thoughts on Sky News reporting that Corbyn's wife is organising a group to stand a candidate against Labour in Uxbridge. Could this scupper Labour's chances of taking this seat? I'd find it improbable. You can't rule anything out, of course. One of the problems for Labour is all, and the Lib Dems indeed, and the Green Party, is always the splitting of the vote. Traditionally, this is changing now. There is a change coming, and I may talk about this more next week, depending on what happens in the news. But traditionally, throughout most of my life, it has been the situation that the left-wing vote is split between Labour, what became the Lib Dems. They weren't the Lib Dems originally when I was growing up, but the Lib Dems, the Green Party, as they started to emerge, and maybe a few there might be, as with anyone, a few independents or something like that, but mostly between Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens, and then in Scotland you've got the SNP in the mix, and in Wales you've got Plaid. Whereas the Conservatives get the right-wing votes, and then they are fighting the centre, so they can concentrate on the centre. And UKIP, okay, started to take a little bit out of them, but nothing that they should have worried about. Nothing that was worth triggering a Brexit referendum for. But so obviously anything that splits the vote is a concern for Labour. In the case of Uxbridge, Labour are not expected to, well, I'll put it this way, the polling would suggest they should comfortably win it. So the bigger problem for me is not, can she take enough votes off Labour to allow the Tories to win? Because she's basically doing what George Galloway did in Batley and Spen a couple of years ago. He's trying to get the Tories elected. Or in her case, she is trying to get the Tories elected on this occasion. So can it work? Can it? I don't know what realistically she could do. I don't necessarily suggest, because effectively she's the Corbyn candidate, and, you know, it's probable that she will attract more than like... It's not like Lawrence Fox standing. Is he the one standing in Uxbridge and South Ruislip? I think they've done a deal with Reform UK, haven't they, the Reclaim Party. Lawrence Fox, I think, is standing in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and then someone from the Reform UK is standing in Selby and Ainsty. So Lawrence Fox, I think, is just going to get a few dozen votes. Nothing. The Corbyn candidate, doesn't matter who it is, will inevitably get more than that. Is it enough? Is it enough to get the Labour vote down below the Conservative vote? It is possible. My main worry is not that it stops Labour winning the seat. My main worry is that it knocks down the margin by which they win. Because what I want to see in Uxbridge and South Ruislip is a hefty win. Because at the moment, MRP polling would suggest that Labour should win with approximately something like a 10% swing in the vote, I believe. I'd have to check on it now. But basically, I want the results to be what the polling suggests it will. Now, remember, the polling is cannot really work very well for by-elections, but people will want to read into it, and I want them to be able to. Do I think not watching other commentators keeps me away from confirmation bias or increases it? I don't think it really does either. It inevitably, because I'm human, if I did listen to a lot of commentators, and every now and then I do have time in the evening, inevitably I'm going to spend more time listening to someone I agree with. So you could argue if I listen to a lot, it could ramp up the confirmation bias, because, you know, if I start listening to, Nigel Farage or Maya Toosey, I'll listen for a little bit, and then inevitably I'm going to go, this is just ridiculous. And I'll stop watching it, won't I? I'll try something else. Whereas if I listen to, James O'Brien or Max Robespierre or someone like that, I'll listen to it and I'll probably watch the whole thing. So, yeah, you could argue that if I spent more time listening, I would just increase my confirmation bias. And I don't want to be arrogant and say, just because I am aware that I have biases, that I am forewarned and therefore forearmed and I can't fall for it. Of course I can. I just try very hard not to. But anyway, Laura Alvarez called into question Starmer's mental health the other week. I mean, it's just... The thing is, they're not... I mean, first of all, they're showing their true colours, aren't they? Just like George Galloway, what they're doing is trying to stop Labour winning. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop Labour winning. They're showing their hand. And specifically, they want the Conservatives to win. And I have said this. There are some people that say these people are the same as Tories. They're basically Tories. For all them talking about Tony Blair being a red Tory, it's like, no, these are the real red Tories. And it's not true to say that. They're not Tories, and they don't like the Tories, and they don't want the Tories to be in government. But at the same time, if you set out with a deliberate aim of allowing the Conservative candidate to win when it's between the Conservatives and Labour, when you actually want to hurt Labour's vote to allow a Conservative MP to win, then they're not Tories. But is there really very much difference? It's sort of like the issue of, racism. Someone, for example, may not be a racist, but if they enable racism, so a weak manager, for example, if there's racism in their workplace, in their team, or sexism, or anything like that, and the manager is aware of it and does nothing out of weakness, then they're not necessarily themselves racist or misogynistic, but is it different materially because they're still enabling it? And it's the same thing here. There is no material difference, because at the end of the day, politics isn't about what you want. It's about what you least oppose. And if you put effort and money into a project that is with its this isn't an indirect effect. This isn't like collateral damage. Their specific aim is, because their specific aim is not to get elected. They're not going to get elected, and they know they're not going to get elected. They probably won't even pretend they're going to get elected. Their specific aim is to take votes off Labour. That is their aim, to take votes off Labour and to allow the Conservatives to win. And you just think, these people, and I've said this in the past, these people were never Labour. When they were in, there's a difference between someone in the Labour Party because they want the Labour Party to win, because they most identify with Labour values, and someone who's in the Labour Party to try and steer it, whether for noble reasons or not, to become something else. But there it is. Barry saying, the Lib Dems getting a lot of calls and emails to go to Mid-Bedfordshire. Nothing at all about the other two by-elections. No. I tell you what I keep finding interesting. So we'll move on from that little topic because I think I've covered it. The Mid-Bedfordshire is a really interesting one because I'm looking at it, and I did the video on it, didn't I? Saying it's classic. It's one of those classic areas. If you look at the demographics, very conservative, but they could vote for the Lib Dems. So one of those where Labour comes second, but like North Shropshire, their ceiling's probably not high enough to beat the Conservatives, but the Lib Dems probably is. And people are saying, oh, but Labour have been campaigning there. It's like, yeah, but they campaigned in North Shropshire at the beginning, but not later on. But then people have been looking at deeper, and they've been looking at the local election results, and they've been looking at other things as well. And there's some people thinking, hang on a minute, Labour may be able to have a pop at this. Now, I don't know now. I'm now unsure. But what I will say, because it's interesting you say the Lib Dems are giving their members lots of calls and emails to go to Mid-Bedfordshire. I'm still going to say this. I've not had anything from the Labour Party asking for a donation for Mid-Bedfordshire or asking for volunteers to go down there. But I am seeing it for Selby and Aintree and Uxbridge and South Ruislip. And it's and you could argue, well, that maybe that's because the Mid-Bedfordshire by-election isn't happening just yet. But I was getting those emails about Uxbridge and South Ruislip and Selby and Aintree before they had happened as well. But nothing for Mid-Bedfordshire. So I'm still, although I'm now looking at Mid-Bedfordshire in more detail and thinking, or more specifically, I've followed some statisticians who've pointed out something. I'm still looking at it, and I'm looking at it and thinking, this is now a weird seat. This is a funny seat. I'm not now sure. But given that I've seen no concrete evidence that Labour really are interested in it, I'm still going to work on the assumption it's a Lib Dem target. And I mean, as in, it won't be a three, because in theory it could be, obviously the Lib Dems are going to go for it. That's clear. In theory, it could be a three-way fight, which would be foolish. All I can say is if Labour do seriously contest it, they better bloody win it, because I will be the first to kick them up the arse if they don't. You're saying, Greg, blah, 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 something about the Jamie Driscoll thing again. You couldn't find any comments Jamie had made. I'm thinking about the best way to do this, because I can easily look them up, but it's in terms of the best way to, I don't know how I'd be able to contact you on that. But essentially, he was asked recently, so it shouldn't be difficult to find it. He was asked recently to dissociate himself from certain comments, and he refused to do so. But I mean, at the end of the day, you can take it or leave it. You can take it or leave it. At the end of the day, the party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, did this. Ed Miliband did this. Keir Starmer's doing this. The party leadership with the NEC, they obviously need the approval of the NEC. have the right to shortlist candidates. It's really that simple. I mean, I'm subject to the. I might as well say I am subject to the same process. I've done something rather reckless. It might not be that reckless actually, but I have done something fairly odd. And I am in a constituency at the moment which is very Tory town. Although interestingly, the MRP would suggest that if the boundaries stayed the same, come the next general election, the Conservatives would still win this seat, but Labour could, if they wanted to really push it with a good candidate, anything could happen. But the boundaries are changing, and I am going to go from being, at the moment I'm in Brigham Goole, I'm going to be going to Doncaster East, and I am the very Tory area of what will be Doncaster East. Now, Labour should win it in the next general election, but future general elections, it could very much be a marginal. The boundary changes have made it from what used to be a strong Labour seat, because all of the Doncaster, 3 seats in Doncaster, all of them were fairly strong Labour in the past. One of them flipped Tory in the general election, but it was expected to flip back, Don Valley. And then Doncaster should have been a strong Labour city now, forevermore, okay, or at least for the foreseeable future. That will not now be the case. But long story short, they have called for candidates for Doncaster East, and I have gone and put my name forwards, which may be foolish, but I also don't really expect to get very far. But it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, I'm not doing it lightly. I have, I'm working on the principle it could go all the way. You never know. But because I'm not established to stand as no, I'm not necessarily standing as a candidate. I'd have to be chosen to stand as the candidate. So all I'm saying is I've applied. So there's various stages that would have to happen for me to ever be allowed into the House of Commons. The first of which is that Labour would have to shortlist me. So what I'm saying is I now go through the same process. If they don't shortlist me, I'm not going to go on Twitter complaining about how unfair it is and how it's anti-democratic or anything. If I don't make the shortlist, I don't make the shortlist. It's really that simple. There will be no sour grapes from me. If I do make the shortlist, then there will be a campaign in Doncaster East. I am not established because I am in Axome at the moment, which is very Tory. There's no real Labour group here. We've had one Labour meeting since I've lived here, and there was hardly anyone there. And you can understand it because it's arse-kicking territory for Labour. It is Tory town. In the local elections, they didn't even Labour didn't even, they put 2 paper candidates up. They didn't even campaign. There was no campaign leaflets or anything. So I am not established. So if anyone stands from the Doncaster part and they're already established, they might be a councillor, but they'll certainly be known and they'll be an active campaigner, then they will almost certainly win. It's not likely to be me anyway. The only chance I would realistically have of becoming the candidate is if no one else really wanted to do it, which I would be surprised at. Usually you only get people not really bothered about it if there's if it is like this constituency at the moment is, where it's basically the Labour candidates just going to get their arse kicked, because it's not, campaigning is tough. It's really tough. It's tough for the volunteers because they don't even get anything out of it, but it's tough for the candidate because they can end up with a load of abuse. They can end up with the media spotlight on them. The Tories will be digging on you. It can actually be quite unpleasant. So, it's if you've got a chance at least, then it can be worth it because you've got a shot. But if you haven't, if you know you're going to lose every day of the week, then would you really put yourselves through it? But there we go. Adam's saying, just double check my emails. I have individual emails from Labour asking for donations for Uxbridge and Ruislip, Selby. Mid Bedfordshire's mentioned in another email that names all 3 but not individually. Okay. See, I haven't even had that, in all honesty. It may be partly regional, although what I would say is I'm a lot closer to Mid Bedfordshire than Uxbridge and South Ruislip, because that's on the other side of London to me. But anyway, it wouldn't be the Right Honourable Phil Morehouse. You don't get to be Right Honourable unless you're in the Privy Council. It would be the Honourable. That's it. As an MP, you have to be. Basically, you have to have realistically been a member of a cabinet or shadow cabinet before you can be Right Honourable. Is mostly how it works. So there you go. Doncaster needs a Labour paladin, maybe. It wouldn't just be Doncaster though; it's split. Because as I say, whoever stands should probably win. I'm not saying they can take it easy, because I've had a look at the MRP polling for the new boundaries and it looks solid, but you wouldn't take anything for granted. So it's losable if you have a candidate that's where something comes out about them, say, or they're just really crap. They could still lose it, which is, one of the things that makes it you're anxious about. But what I would say is I don't see it being a safe Labour seat into the future. I see it, the way they've changed the boundaries, it looks to me very much like it will be more of a barometer seat. Like what I call a barometer seat is one that very often changes with the national mood. In other words, when there's a Labour government, it's probably Labour. When there's a Tory government, it'll probably be Tory. Because you're not going to win it by a lot. Labour know the best they could achieve in Mid Bedfordshire is to split the vote and let the Tories keep it. See, that's what I'm assuming. And if that is true, Labour will absolutely stay away, because, in all honesty, because it is in Labour's interest for the Conservatives to lose that seat. It's absolutely in Labour's interest for the Tories to lose that seat. Doesn't matter. When the Lib Dems took... what was that first one they lost? Chesham and Amersham, was it? When the Lib Dems took that was good for Labour. Labour weren't in that, but it was still good for them, because Boris Johnson lost a safe seat, a safe Tory seat. That is all to the good of Labour. When they lost Tiverton and Honiton, when they lost North Shropshire, those were good results for Labour. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing here. But all I would say, Greg, is, when these things happen, you may agree or you don't agree, but it will always come down to this. No one has a God-given right to stand for a party. You have a right as a citizen to stand. Anyone can stand, but you do not have a right. No one has a right to stand for the party. The party decides how the party needs to be cohesive. If someone is not, because not everyone that has been denied candidacy has been someone who said something really terrible. Some of them have just been people who have publicly attacked the Labour Party, or who have, because one of the things, so I filled in an application, right? One of the questions is, is there, it sort of tackles the issue of, is there anything you've done or said which could bring embarrassment to the Labour Party? So you don't even have to have done something morally wrong. If you've done or said anything that could be damaging to the party, it could just be something, when you were young, you just did something stupid when you were young, right? And you could have apologised for it since. The problem is, what the Tories will do and the Tory press will do, if you've got a candidate that's got anything at all, any skeleton in their closet, they'll bring it out, and if they can use it to not just tarnish you, because it's not about losing one seat, they could use it nationally. This is the sort of person that represents the Labour Party. So no one has the right, doesn't matter how long they've been campaigning for Labour, being a Labour politician, no one has the right to be a Labour candidate. And all the people that have complained when they have not been made the Labour candidate, every single one, it's all been for different reasons, but every single one shares a common trait. They're all entitled. And if you want to be entitled in politics, go and join the Tories. They love that behaviour. They absolutely love it. It is toxic to the Labour Party. I would argue it's toxic to politics in general, but it is absolutely toxic to the Labour Party because the Labour Party do not have a mainstream media batting for them. The Labour Party they are not considered the grown-up party by the public. They think of Conservatives as being the serious ones, and Labour has been like the revolutionaries. That is just seeped into the national consciousness. So Labour have always got it up against them, and they must have the most serious candidates, and the ones who will put the party ahead of themselves. And like I say, I could fall at the first hurdle, you know, and I'm not doing this just for a bit of a laugh, because that would be a terrible thing to do. Because if I do get through to the shortlist, I might displace someone else. If I am selected as the candidate, I might displace someone else. If I am made an MP, I'm going to do it seriously. I'm going to do it properly, because I do not want to think at some point later on, when I either lose my seat or Labour lose an election, that I did not do my absolute best to keep the Tories out. So I am taking it seriously, otherwise I would never have applied. But which means I am of the opinion that I could do a good job of it. But if I fall at the first hurdle, there will be no complaints from me. Not at all. Phil, would the Labour Party move someone from outside your district to set up residency to run for your district? They don't have to be residents. In all honesty, what I would say, I'm not saying that every time the Labour Party have done a funny thing regarding selections that it has always been right. Like, there's an issue somewhere, and I've forgotten where now, where there's been a bit of so look at the situation, right? So I'm talking about, I'm going to merge with Doncaster East, right? There is no Doncaster East at the moment. It's like Don Valley, I think. But there's a new boundary thing. Now, there has been a case, at least one case, where Labour have started a selection process for a constituency candidate, and some people who are outside of that constituency, but who are going to join that constituency after the boundary changes come in, have been excluded from it. Now, you can absolutely criticise that. I criticise that, because that's not about excluding candidates. That's about excluding certain Labour members from the process. What I would say in Doncaster East case is that's not happened, because I am outside of Doncaster at the moment. So I have been included in an email to stand. So that would suggest to me that it is a genuinely open process. But anyway, we're going to end up sort of talking about... this is how Phil is, in my view, will make a very good MP. The media, let them investigate, the people will decide. Well, I don't know what they'll dig up on me. What they won't dig up on me is of a photo in my teenage years dressed as like a Nazi or something. Because, well, apart from the fact I never did that, I did go to a Rocky Horror Picture Show once in high heels and, you know, all the maid's outfit. But I don't think they'll have that either. There wasn't a lot of digital photography when I was young, and I am also very, bizarrely, for someone whose job now is to stand in front of a camera for quite a lot of time of the day, I am actually quite camera shy. So there are very few photos in existence and very, very few digital photos. I actually tried to look myself up on, if you try and look myself up on Google Images, I don't really get very much. The National Rejoin March, there's a couple of me on the National Rejoin March. There's one of Graham Hughes, for goodness sake, when I put my name in. He's more likely to come up than I do. There's really, when I put my name in, mostly what I see is thumbnails of some of my videos. So I don't think they're going to find very much. And I don't think they'll find anything embarrassing, but who knows? Moderate Tory MPs have no right to complain about Johnson's antics. A sufficient number of them backed him in 2019 for him to reach the final ballot. Absolutely true. I will just say not everyone did, and some of them were vocal that he would not have been suitable. So I am going to suggest there are some Tory MPs who can have every reason. I don't blame them for still standing, because you could say, well, couldn't they have just said, well, I'm not standing as a Tory candidate under Boris Johnson? What I would say to that is putting the party ahead of yourself will often mean not doing that. So I actually don't blame, as long as Tory MPs did nothing to enable him, I actually don't blame them for that. And there were some Tory MPs who are still Tory MPs who did not enable Boris Johnson's rise to power. But one of those people is not Theresa May. We must remember that. Theresa May made him Foreign Secretary. Didn't have to. She didn't have to. She made him Foreign Secretary. I just did in my video today, when it was discovered what he'd done in Italy, she should have sacked. I mean, she sacked Priti Patel for going behind her back to the Israeli government, didn't she? That was seen as a betrayal of the country. So Priti Patel was sacked. Boris Johnson, his offence was worse, surely. He should have been sacked and kicked out of the Tory party. So Theresa May does not get to be one of the people I consider not to... She obviously didn't want him to become leader, but she still enabled him. He shouldn't have been an MP to become leader. He shouldn't actually have been an MP. Or not a Tory MP. If he wanted to become an MP standing as an independent, fine. She can't do it about that. Phil, to succeed as a Labour candidate, don't repeat my support for Corbyn economic policies. There's nothing wrong with his economic policies, but inevitably, I mean, one thing I will always say is my position, my politics is quite far to the left, but I understand that that's not where voters are. So if I were to write my preferred manifesto, if it was guaranteed to be implemented, it would be very different to me writing a manifesto that was needed to win an election. And that's called democracy. You know, democracy is doing what the people want, not you, what the people want. It's really quite simple. How the hell can Boris have managed to commit so many crimes? Because he gets away with it. I mean, I don't know how many actual crimes, literal crimes, he may have committed, but he gets away with it. Actually, do you know what? Interestingly, I'm just looking here. I've put in film art, I've put it in Google Images. A thumbnail has come up here. For all those people who'll go, oh, it was your fault Jeremy Corbyn lost because you criticised him. It's like, right, okay. How Corbyn could beat Brexit and Johnson. My videos were full of advice for what he could have done. But anyway, never mind that. Was it very uncomfortable to wear high heels? Not as uncomfortable as it would have been if I was sober. Or if I was as fat as I am now. Is it okay to want to see Phil in high heels? I should not be wearing them now. I shouldn't have worn them then, really. I could have easily just got some flats. I don't even know how I managed to find someone with high heels that fit my feet. I must have found a Yeti to lend them to me. In actual fact, didn't lend them to me. I got them from it was like a thingy shop, costume department. It wasn't a costume hire shop. It was like a drama thing. You know, just all the odds and sods that like the university, like the drama group had. But there you go. Gingers are more photogenic. I'm not that ginger. I just look a bit like my mum was ginger, so there's inevitably some in there. But I think it's just the lighting. It's not really ginger. It's like, this is very brown, and you know, it used to be blonde, and then it went very dark blonde, and now it's brown. But no, my position will be my position if I'm presenting myself to the members. Because the thing is, I don't even want to conceal anything. I want them to be clear what my position is, but also what I would do as an MP, which is not the same thing as pushing everything I want to do. Because it's important. The last thing I would want is to become their candidate, become their MP, and then I start using my position MPs to talk about all sorts of things, and they thought, hang on a minute, he kept that a bit quiet, didn't he? Because then you don't want to lose. You know, if anyone's pissed off with you for your views, they need to be pissed off before you become their candidate. Because then at least you've been democratically selected. and then they can just whine at me as much as they like. That was all down to Russian money. May has links with them. Well, all the Tories effectively do, even if they haven't directly taken money, because the Tory party has been bankrolled by Putin-linked oligarchs. But anyway, what's that? Have I missed a good question? Oh, thoughts on Mark Carney saying that the current inflation is solely due to Brexit. I mean, we know it's not solely due to Brexit, in all honesty. When neoliberal policies of the last 40 years is a major factor. Yeah, it's no one is really. I haven't actually read the piece, by the way. I'm aware of it. No one. I don't think anyone is. Well, if he is, he is. I'd be surprised. I am not suggesting that our inflation is solely down to Brexit. Like, if we'd still been in the EU, because think about where inflation's supposed to be. The target is to be below 2%, right? So, am I saying that if we were still in the EU, our inflation would be below 2%? No. I've seen no suggestion from anyone that that would be the case. And if we're going to say that our inflation would be above 2%, even if we were still in the EU, but with a Tory government doing everything else that they do, then some of it must be down to other things. But inevitably, Brexit, like with everything else, is adding a premium to it. And it's obvious, isn't it? If you need to get more food into the country because we can't produce as much of our own and the pound is weaker, you're paying more for that food. That adds to food inflation. That's Brexit that did that. It's Brexit that weakened the pound, and it's Brexit that means we have to import more food than we used to. If we have to import more food because we have to allow for higher rates of spoilage, because we haven't got the supply chains to get the fresh food to us while it's still fresh, so you need more food in order to have the food that's not rotten yet, that is going to add to the cost, because you will be charged for all the food that had to be thrown away as well by the people who bought it but couldn't sell it to you in time. You know, even individuals, if you go shopping, some people go shopping, buy the stuff, get it home, and then a day later it looks all right. Well, it doesn't look brilliant, but it looks all right. And a day later it's gone off, you can't eat it, you throw it away. Well, you still wanted that food, so you'll go out and get some more, won't you? Or maybe what you do, what some people are doing, because a lot of people are now finding blighted potatoes. I am. So sometimes what you do is you get twice as many potatoes as you normally would if you're going through a bit of a potato phase. I go through phases of sometimes, not at the moment, I'm not really eating potatoes, and then sometimes I have loads of potatoes. So, but when I do, I get twice as much because I know some of them, I'm going to have to cut bits off them and, you know, and things. So I'm not going to get as much potato. So I get more. All of that adds to the cost. So, and that's just going through it empirically. That's not even considering the fact that we're going to have, because we are the country of last resort, the market of last resort, we have to pay a bit of a premium to get anything sometimes. Or the fact, because I'll tell you what doesn't show up in the inflation figures. So I, for example, I'm sort of traditionally like someone who would go to Tesco, right? Very often what I do when I want fresh fruit and veg now, I just get it on Ocado. Because it's much fresher. It's actually all right. You don't get stuff going off straight away. It costs more because they will be paying more for the fresher stuff, right? And they'll be paying more for the lorry drivers to get it to them in time. So that is a form of food inflation that I bet's not included in the figures. The fact that some people who can afford it are shopping at the more expensive outlets now because it's the only way to guarantee that the stuff when it arrives is going to be fresh. And then, of course, we've got the standards controls coming in, which is going to mean adding, I mean, when you've got, like, if you're going to apply 43, up to, it's somewhere between 21 and 43 pounds, I think, per consignment of food, even for a relatively small consignment, you know, if you're, like, I think it's just been, like, about delis are going to be hit, like, small businesses are going to be hit. If you've just ordered some salami in, you've got to pay, your supplier's not going to take the hit, you're going to pay that. Maybe 43 quid health certificate or inspection charge. And all of that's going to be extra. So of course, Brexit is responsible for a chunk of inflation that would not otherwise exist. But I don't think it's fair to say it's the sole cause of our inflationary problems. Could another Tory leader, Gove, Hunt or Raab, have beaten Corbyn, or did Tory MPs think Johnson was the only one? Tory MPs did genuinely believe Johnson was the only one. It's true that Gove and Hunt were fairly bland characters. Could they have won over the Red War? Maybe not. So it may well be that even if they were personally more popular than Corbyn, and Corbyn's popularity was very low at the time, it may well be that they still wouldn't have beaten Labour. It may well. I don't think Labour would have won the election either. I think that was quite clear. It would have been back to hung Parliament territory. But that would have suited me, because that would then have been second referendum. Because I was told by my MP at the time that MPs were basically ready to go with a second referendum to break the general election was the last shot. It was the last throw of the die. After that, they were actually going to go for a second referendum. It was the only way through. So if we'd have had a hung Parliament as a result of that election, we would not have left the EU. Really that simple. But could Gove or Hunt have beaten Corbyn? I honestly don't know. Whereas Tory MPs did genuinely believe that Boris Johnson was the one who had the best chance of beating him. And they were probably right. But again, that is not putting country ahead of party, is it? You know, what's it supposed to be? I think Winston Churchill said, and I think a lot of people would agree. I don't think it's easy to disagree. What was it? He said, yeah, in terms of your order of priority as an MP, country, constituency, party. Now, I would say it's an interesting question if you put the party in there at all, because I would suggest that if you believe in your party, you will think that the best thing for your country and your constituency is putting the party's interest. Because what is the party interest? The party interest is in winning the next election. So I would say it's actually a bit more nuanced than that, because if you believe in your party, you believe that the best thing for your party, your country and your constituency is to have that party in government. Will we see Johnson or Trump as leaders in Civ 7? I mean, I don't know. I haven't played Civ since... When was the last one I played? It might have been... I know I played Civ 3 a lot. I think I may have played a bit of Civ 5. I think I missed 4 out altogether. I've not played it since then. I really couldn't say. I would like to think not. That would be quite grim, wouldn't it? That would be disappointing. Charlotte Owen is on. Johnson's on a list, but no one knows why. No, we won't, and we probably won't for some time. We may eventually. Usually things have a habit of coming out over time when the people who know sort of don't think there's any harm in sort of revealing it. But we'll not find out for quite a while. I wonder how Carrie has taken all this meltdown. She's been very quiet of late. She has, hasn't she? At the same time, I mean, it depends what she saw in him or sees in him, because she's still having another sprog with him. You know, if she's just attracted to the money and the fact that he's this big public figure, he's still got money, he's still a big public figure. You know, so if she was attracted to the power, I mean, she must surely have known that he was going to lose power at some point. There's lots of people keep saying how long before Carrie walks out on him. And it's like, I mean, the thing is, Boris Johnson, his entire life, has always walked out on his women. I don't know that any women have ever walked out on him. So he will certainly not see it coming if it does happen. But she might actually love him. Who knows? Takes all sorts. Susan saying, there are indirect Brexit inflation effects. For example, Truss's mini-budget hike mortgage payments, but for Brexit, there's no chance Truss would ever become PM. Yes, that is a very good point. Same with Boris Johnson. But I still say you can't be certain Boris Johnson wouldn't have been able to replace David Cameron. It was, you look at it and you think, you know, he felt that he needed to be the Eurosceptic champion to do that. He may not have been right, but we will never know unless we can dip into a parallel universe where David Cameron actually had some balls and didn't agree to the referendum. But yeah, there are, you know, indirect impacts of Brexit are getting prime ministers who are not only like fairly unpleasant, but actually grossly incompetent. And that extends to Rishi Sunak as well. Just because he gives the impression of being more sensible and grounded, you know, when you consider the way the economy is melting down, and it's not just, you know, he is the prime minister now, but he was also the chancellor in the preceding years. And he doesn't get to blame all of our woes now on the quasi-Kwarteng budget. He can blame some of them, but he does not get to blame all of them. After all, if gilt yields went down and then have been slowly creeping back up to the point where they're higher than they were, he's got to take some responsibility for that. And he is, with his chancellor, pushing a Bank of England desire to trigger a recession because they think it will deal with inflation. So they're prioritising. So they are actually literally, when Liz Truss called them the anti-growth coalition, they literally are. Because Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, ironically, so when they say Liz Truss was right, there's only one thing she was right about, and that is that Rishi Sunak is leading the anti-growth coalition, because objectively he is. He has adopted a formal policy, or he is supporting the Bank of England in adopting a monetary policy of economic contraction, because that's what a recession is. They actually want the economy to contract. They are, and that's their stated aim. Again, that is not collateral damage. They are trying to trigger, not necessarily a recession, because recession is just contraction over 2 periods. They don't need it to be a recession, but they do need the economy to contract. And that is an anti-growth policy. Of course it is. Right, we're out of time. Let's go through the last few here. Maybe Carrie will stand against me. She's not going to come all the way up to Doncaster, is she? Also, do you know what? I would fancy my chances against Carrie Johnson. I nearly called her Carrie Simmons then. I have no sympathy for Carrie. She knew exactly what she was getting into and couldn't wait to get it. She may not even be unhappy. We you know, people may be assuming because Johnson is a massive egomaniac that she's not. She might be. He was an egomaniac when he met her. She might be perfectly happy with her purchase. What else beyond money would make anyone attracted to Johnson? Petronella walked out on him. Oh, did she? Oh, okay, fair enough. Power, money or power. You know, there's nothing about his character, I would have thought, but I don't know. Again, like I say, it takes all sorts. If Johnson became leader after Cameron resigned in 2016, there would probably have been a softer Brexit. Well, we may not have got a Brexit at all, of course, because Boris Johnson would have run into the same problems, wouldn't he? And if he ended up with the ERG against him, splitting the party, or even with him, with the rest of the party against him, then he would have had to fall on his sword and then be replaced by whom? There was no one more insane than Boris Johnson that was in a... I mean, we know there's the likes of Suella Braverman and Liz Truss. They were not in a position to take... It would have been Michael Gove or Jeremy Hunt or Theresa May, maybe. So, yeah, it's very difficult to try and predict what would have happened if Boris Johnson had replaced David Cameron. Liz Truss supporters are now rewriting history saying she was right. Yeah, they are. But as I say, the only thing they were right about is the fact that Sunak would be no better. How does high interest rates on UK deal with inflation? Well, so what the Bank of England are saying, I'm not reading between the lines here, that what they're actually saying is if people have to spend more on their mortgage, they can't afford to spend it on other things. Now, there are times when you can argue higher interest rates can be used to tackle inflation. If, for example, the inflation is being fueled by cheap loans, cheap debt, and people are getting loans to pay for like things they don't need, new cars or home improvements or something, then okay, raising interest rates makes the cost of borrowing more expensive, which dissuades people from getting it because there's no longer the cheap loans. Okay, fine. But that's not what we have a problem. The inflation is being fueled by things we need, food, energy, and so on. So it's not really being fueled by excessive demand, it's lack of supply. But that is what the Bank of England are saying. If we make it more expensive, then they'll have to cut back. They'll have to cut back on their spending. That is what they're saying that. That's not me reading into it. It's what they've actually stated. Right, last few, really quickly then. My local MP, Laura Farris, resigned from the Privileges Committee looking into Johnson's line to Parliament. Any thoughts on why? I think she was going to be edging her bets to get a job in this government. Possibly, or possibly she just wanted heat. The Privileges Committee, it was very obvious, were going to be under the most intense pressure. When I say pressure, I mean abuse from the Boris Johnson cultists. And she may just, and it may have been that the particular, and that would have included, I don't just mean in the media, I mean in their own constituency, right? So I don't blame any member of that committee for standing down if it was going to cause friction in their local constituency. At the end of the day, there were Tory MPs who live in constituencies where they can safely deal with Boris Johnson and or MPs who wouldn't care because they're standing down anyway. So I suspect it was probably that. Maybe she was hankering after a job in government, maybe not. But ultimately, I could well believe it was just her local constituency wouldn't have liked her. They'd have put pressure on her, threatened deselection, that sort of thing. So fine. But I don't know the reason. Would the mortgage time bomb actually affect Labour's electoral chances? They've already alienated homeowners, haven't they? I don't see how Labour have alienated homeowners, really. Because homeowners are paying, homeowners are paying hundreds of pounds. Like the average is said to be £3,000 a year on their mortgage, but that's the average. People in more expensive parts of like the south of England, it's more than that. And so I really don't think Labour, and I know what you're saying because they're talking about wanting house prices to fall, but ultimately what they're also talking about is mortgage payments to fall. If you've got a house at the moment, you're not going anywhere. So what you want to do is you want your mortgage payments falling. You are much less bothered at the moment about house prices. But anyway, we'll have to sort of keep it there. I could keep going on forever, but we've got to go back downstairs. Thanks very much anyway for coming on. It was loads discussed there. We'll be back on again next week. Who knows what the topic will be then. But have a good evening, everyone. And until next time, I'll see you later.